Wednesday, July 9 edition of PFT PM, creeping closer and closer toward the return of PFT Live on July 28. And to answer the many of you from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean who have asked the question, I do not know if and when PFT Live returns, whether or not it will be on Sky Sports. I will find out in advance of July 28. One thing we'll know well before July 28, we'll know before 4 p.m. Eastern on July 15. Will the Chiefs and guard Trey Smith work out a long-term deal to replace his one-year, $23.4 million franchise tag? July 15 is the deadline every year for any player who has been tagged, whether he's signed it or not, to do a multi-year deal. After July 15, cannot do a multi-year deal until the end of the upcoming regular season. Now, Smith has already taken the money, which is smart. It's $23.4 million. It's nearly $3 million more per year than the average for guards. That's one of the realities of the franchise tag for offensive linemen. It's not broken down by position. So anytime you tag someone other than a tackle, you're basically applying the de facto tackle franchise tag. So big money for Trey Smith, smart to sign it when he did. And now it's as simple as this. He's got a bird in the hand. And it's a pretty big bird in the hand. It's $23.4 million this year, guaranteed. Next year, if they tag him again, he gets a 20% raise. That's $28.08 million next year. Or he becomes a free agent. So whatever the Chiefs offer him on a long-term deal between now and next Tuesday, July 15, he has to compare it to the bird in the hand. What's the bird in the hand? The bird in the hand takes two hands to hold. $23.4 million plus a ticket to free agency or another $28 million for an interior offensive lineman. What does it take to give that up? That was one of the big criticisms I had of the deal that T. Higgins did after he'd been tagged the second time. They didn't fully offset the bird in the hand that he had, which was a significant, I can't remember what it was, $28 million or so this year, and no way they're going to tag him next year because it would have been either quarterback money or a 40% bump over this year's tag. It would have been, there's no way the Bengals or anyone would have done it. He would have been a free agent next year. So he gave up that shot at free agency next year for whatever the Bengals gave him. And I thought when I looked at the final deal, maybe he should have just played it out. I think they used against him the fact that he wanted to stay with the Bengals. He grew up rooting for the Bengals, and he wanted to stay with the Bengals, so he did the deal. With Smith and the Chiefs, it all depends on what that last best number is. What will he do? Will he want $51 million fully guaranteed at signing? $52 million, that's the number. No, wait, it's $23.4 plus $28. That's $51.4. The way that it usually works with a franchise tag player, if you're going to do a long-term deal, you guarantee him what he would have made this year and next year under the franchise tag, and then you put 2 or 3 non-guaranteed years on the back end. So it would be $51.48 million, sorry. I'm getting the 4 and the 3 mixed up in my head. $51.48 million fully guaranteed at signing with some back end years that would be non-guaranteed, but there's no reason to think the Chiefs wouldn't keep him. That would be a fair outcome. That would be the thing that makes it not quite a wash. It makes it attractive because it guarantees you the $28 million for next year. Now, there's no guarantee that he's going to get through the season healthy. There's no guarantee he's going to continue to play well. There's no guarantee anybody would want him at $28 million for next year. If you get both tags now fully guaranteed, then that makes sense, if that's what the Chiefs are willing to do. There's another wrinkle to this that I didn't think of until I was looking up Trey Smith's career experience. He started all but one game in the regular season, 67 of 68. He was a week 1, 6th-round pick rookie starter at right guard for the Kansas City Chiefs. Also, since he arrived in 2021, he has played every snap of 13 postseason games. That's almost another season of wear and tear, of injury risk, of value to the Chiefs. And I had a thought and I'd never considered this before, but the Chiefs are such a juggernaut The worst they've done under Patrick Mahomes is lose in overtime in the AFC Championship. At what point, when you're negotiating contracts for core players, is it fair to say, hey, hang on. Whatever you're going to pay him for the 17 regular season games, we need to factor in a sweetener, given the reality that we're expecting multiple postseason games every year. And those postseason game checks, those playoff game checks are peanuts in comparison to what the best players make during the regular season. That's the counter to Patrick Mahomes doesn't make top of the market. You shouldn't expect it either. So I don't know whether or not that's going to be part of the negotiation. I do know that there's an expectation there will be talks between now and next Tuesday, but Smith is sitting on a pretty good situation, and we'll see if the Chiefs offer enough to get him to turn in the $23.4 million he's due to make this year guaranteed, the opportunity to make $28 million next year under the franchise tag, or go to free agency. Will they offer enough to get him to say yes to that? We'll see. Deadline again, 4 p.m. Eastern next Tuesday. Now, saw a story this morning on PFT, those bastards. MDS gets up really early, and he usually posts something like 2 hours before I get my ass out of bed. He posted about Kyren Williams, the Rams running back, who is due for a new contract, and he's been involved in everything. He's checking all the boxes. He's being a good soldier. He's fully engaged, and he's taking the leap of faith. The Rams will take care of him. And it occurred to me, this is a great compare and contrast situation, because you've got Kyren Williams with the Rams on one hand, who's doing everything voluntarily and otherwise that the team expects. And then you've got James Cook on the other hand, who stayed away from the offseason program, the voluntary side of it. Yeah, he showed up for mandatory minicamp because he didn't want to be fined $100,000 or whatever it was, but he's not happy about his contract, and he's playing not quite hardball, but close to it with the Bills. Denied services in the offseason. Maybe he'll hold out from training camp. I don't know. Maybe he'll hold in. But that cloud is darker, the one that's hanging over Cook and the Bills. And Cook is trying to get his long-term contract by being unpleasant and not cooperative. Kyren Williams is doing everything that the Rams want him to do. He is choosing to say, I'm on board. I'm going to do what you want, and please pay me a fair contract. Both guys are due to make $5.3 million this year, and both guys have been very good. Williams had 1,144 rushing yards in his second season, 1,299 last year, 15 total touchdowns in 23, 16 total touchdowns in 24. Cook had 1,122 rushing yards in 23, his second season, 6 total touchdowns. Last year, only 1,009 yards rushing, but 18 total touchdowns. Both guys are key components. They are the straw that stirs the running back drink for two Super Bowl contenders. Just the other day, we were talking about the possibility of a Bills-Rams Super Bowl. Yeah, it's possible. Both are in the window. What will the Rams do for the guy who has fully complied with what the Rams want? What will the Bills do for the guy who's been pushing back? And who goes first? What contract does one guy get? Is that the floor for the other guy? Will one or both have to play out this season at $5.3 million and do the franchise tag dance next year? Remember, Saquon Barkley played under the tag for 1 year after a 5-year rookie contract. He put in 6 years before he got to the market and went to the Eagles. This is going to be 4 years coming up for Williams and Cook, the possibility of a 5th year under the franchise tag, and then maybe they become free agents or they get their rewards. The tension for running backs is simple. Most running backs are easily replaced with a young, cheap guy that you can draft or sign as an undrafted free agent. The great running backs are hard to replace. And that's the wrinkle for the Rams and for the Bills. How great are these guys that we have? How replaceable are they? And thanks to the Giants, there's another wrinkle to consider. How dumb will we look if this guy goes to a team that is set up, built from the inside out, and is ready to absorb a potential superstar running back and make us look like complete and total imbeciles for letting him get away? The Steelers will either look like geniuses or imbeciles for trading George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys for a third-round pick. The morning that trade happened, we got Jason Garrett, the former Cowboys coach, on PFT Live to give his reaction, and he provided a take that I haven't seen or heard anywhere else. But to be candid, I don't spend a lot of my time looking and listening to what others have to say. Number one, it's all I can do to listen to myself. Number two, I never want to be accused of stealing someone else's take. And number three, I just don't really care what other people think. I care what I think. Okay, but Garrett's take that I have yet to see or hear anywhere else, with the caveat previously mentioned, is that Dak Prescott is going to be the key person in the relationship between George Pickens and the Dallas Cowboys. And when you think about it, Pickens has never had a high-end quarterback. He arrived the year after Ben Roethlisberger retired. So he had Kenny Pickett for 2 years, and we know how that went. And last year he had the Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, adequate but not great combination. Pickens has shown that he's got high-end skills. And when you see what Dak Prescott is saying about Pickens, it really makes me wonder, have we finally reached the point where a Steelers receiver who was disgruntled in Pittsburgh, who goes elsewhere, actually does better elsewhere than he did in Pittsburgh? The usual approach is guy that was pretty good, if not great, in Pittsburgh. Once it ends there and he goes elsewhere, it really doesn't. It doesn't pan out. For the guys who were, disgruntled in some way. Here's what Dak Prescott recently said via DallasCowboys.com about Pickens. Go turn on his tape. He's getting separation. He's got separation even when he's not getting the ball at times. And when he doesn't have separation, he's still making the catches. It's not going to be hard. For me, it's about getting the ball near that guy, and he will be George Pickens. Go turn on the tape. He's great at doing it. Yes. It's become very popular to crap on George Pickens. But if you watch him play, and I've been saying this for years, he's the guy who's open when he's not open. He's the guy who will contort his body in midair to make the contested catch. And he can get separation. They just didn't use him enough. That's the great irony, if I'm using the word properly, and again, I never know, in the Steelers paying $30 million a year to DK Metcalf, a guy who was never used properly by the Seahawks. The Steelers are bringing to town a guy who was never used properly by his longtime team to replace a guy that they didn't know how to use properly, and it begs the question, will they know how to use DK Metcalf properly? And will the Cowboys use George Pickens properly? And will he benefit from extra attention paid to CD Lamb? And then when Pickens starts making the highlight reel catches, will they rotate the coverage toward him? And then CD Lamb starts going off. Look, I don't know what the Cowboys are going to be this year. I'd feel better about them if they had a better running game, frankly. And I feel like from a talent standpoint, they're not good enough to compete with the Eagles and the Commanders. But they may be onto something with George Pickens. And it's a fascinating Steelers-Cowboys unofficial rivalry. Did the Steelers get it really wrong? Did the Cowboys get it really right? And what's it going to look like this year for the Cowboys and for the Steelers? Because everything that Pickens is doing this year for the Cowboys, he could have been doing with DK Metcalf drawing double coverage and Pickens on the other side. It still would have been very awkward because he's in a contract year, but he embraced the reality that he's in a contract year in Dallas and CeeDee Lamb's WR1, and Pickens has to just take what he can get. And will Prescott get him in that sweet spot where he takes what he can get, makes the most of it, and sets himself up for a big contract next year with the Cowboys or someone else? The Commanders. Look, I've said plenty about them recently in their effort to get their new stadium built in D.C. The president made the comment yesterday about the federal government possibly taking over D.C. And I know the federal government already runs D.C. as a practical matter, but they don't really run it. They're not really, hands in the dough running it. There's a D.C. government. If the president has the federal government overtake D.C., then the stadium situation becomes his situation. And it all dovetails with what we've been talking about as the Commanders fail to get the D.C. Council to move on the timetable the Commanders want. They wanted approval by July 15 to get the stadium built by 2030. They're not going to get approval by the DC Council by July 15. And that comment just, it just adds to this idea. And we've learned by now that there's always something going on behind the curtain. Like, what's really going on behind the curtain here? And how much of it involves someone pressing the buttons and pulling the strings and coughing up the money necessary to get that stadium built? So keeping a close eye on how this all goes, because the Commanders are determined to build their stadium on the site of where RFK Stadium was. Yeah, Maryland may come to the table and Virginia possibly gets involved. This is all about DC, and this is about getting it done in DC. And I don't know if the federal government's going to take over DC, but that would definitely change the dynamics. And then on top of all of that, they can say all they want that they're not going back to their old name. And look, it's their business. It's their team. I'll react to it at the appropriate time if they do revert to a name that is a dictionary-defined slur. That for how many years? 7 years. There was a debate raging as to whether or not they should get rid of the name. And they finally did, even though the former owner of the team said, I'll never do it, and you can put it in all caps. Well, the current owner of the team has said they're not going back to the former name. And that's not binding, as I said the other day. And they've unveiled throwback uniforms. And the angles chosen for how they showcase the uniforms where you can't see the logo on the side of the helmet, it looks just like the former team uniforms. It looks just like it. It's everything but the logo. How do you not look at that and say, it's just another trial balloon as they move toward possibly re-embracing the old name? Regardless of how you feel about the old name, I feel like they're in the process of tiptoeing toward going back to the old name, and they might do it at some point between now and, I don't know, 2028. I don't know. Or maybe they do it in line with opening the new stadium. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If they get the president involved to break the logjam in DC, or if the federal government takes over DC and they want help from the man in charge, and the man in charge wants the old name back, what are they going to do? Do you want your stadium in DC? If you do, you may have to bring back the old name. And oh, by the way, we're not all that upset about it because, you know, people will buy the jerseys and people will buy the helmets, and there's heritage and there's this and there's that. And yeah, there's people who are going to be upset about it, but they can, you know, they can cry their liberal tears and move on, or whatever they'll say about it. And yes, I'm still going to not stick to sports. I did write that item yesterday on PFT that I'm not going to stick to sports. The feedback was interesting. Most of it was supportive. You can imagine how some of the emails that were not supportive went. I was going to read one of them, but it would have been more bleeps than words that actually would have made it past the censors. One last thing, something that made it past the senators and members of the House of Representatives when they passed the one big beautiful bill. There's that one big ugly provision that dramatically affects gambling, specifically professional gamblers. And I addressed this the other day, and it's playing out exactly how I thought. Not that, you know, I'm some sort of genius, because I'm not, but it doesn't take a genius, which qualifies me to do it, to predict what was going to happen. They jammed through this giant bill with 1,000 things in it. And I know it's not 1,000 things, but it was nearly 1,000 pages. So I don't know, if there's one thing per page, there's 1,000 things in it. They jammed this thing through, and oh, wait a minute, that's in there? Oh, well, that's not good. Well, what are we going to do about that? Well, we better change it. Well, how to get in there? Well, I don't know. Do you know what was in there? I don't know. Yeah, but I had to vote yes for it. They expected me to vote yes for the one big beautiful bill. That's what happened, and that's what's happening, because already there's bipartisan legislation to change the gambling provision that was put in the bill, that gamblers can only deduct 90% of their losses, not 100% of their losses. So I don't know how many other provisions that were jammed in to this bill that overwhelmed the system. And that's what we're seeing now. Sorry if I don't stick to sports. We're seeing governance by overloading the system. There's so much stuff that we have to deal with at any given moment. We can't keep up with it. It's the equivalent of Lucy on the, I know it's a dated reference, but come up with a better one. It's Lucy on the chocolate line. You can't keep up with it. They jam all this stuff in there, and then they're like, well, that one chocolate that fell to the floor, that's a problem. We need to fix that. Now they got to push back against the grain to try to get that thing fixed. And I don't know if it's going to work, and I don't know how many other bills like it are going to be out there. But instead of taking them one at a time, as they should have done, let's jam everything through, and we'll deal with the mess on the back end. And now they are. Nevada's concerned. It's going to hurt Nevada because it's going to scare people away from gambling. I still don't know, and I'm not equipped to understand how this helps or hurts the sports books. I would still think that getting professional gamblers out of business, because professional gamblers are more likely to win and the house wants to win. If I can weed out consistent winners by making their tax situation far less advantageous, that's a win for me if I'm the house. But regardless, that provision went through, and now they're in the process of trying to undo what they did as part of the one big, beautiful bill. All right, let's answer some questions. The Gunblazer asks, have we ever had a better group of coaches in the same division as there is now in the AFC West? That's a point that Chris has made a couple of times, and you look at it top to bottom. You look at the AFC West right now with Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, and Pete Carroll. I can't think of a better collection of coaches ever before in the same division at the same time. Chris, I think, mentioned at one point, like maybe the NFC East in the 80s when you would have had Parcells and Gibbs and Landry. The problem is the Cardinals were in the division then. And Jim Hanifin, who is tied with Ken Wisenhunt for the longest tenure ever in the history of the organization. The team's been around for well over 100 years. 6 years is the record. Jim Hanifin was, I think, 80 to 85. I may be off a little bit, but it was in the 80s, and I think it ran through 85. That would be 6 years, 80 to 85. Ken Wisenhunt did 6 years. Bruce Arians didn't get to 6 years. 6 years, that was it. So if the Cardinals are part of the equation, and they were in the 80s in the NFC East, that keeps it from being top to bottom what the NFC West currently is. If I'm missing something, chastise me on social media. I'm used to that. Florio at ProFootballTalk.com, chastise me there. I'm used to that as well. But I don't think there's ever been a better top to bottom, every coach, no weak link, high-end, potential Hall of Fame, if not actual Hall of Fame coaches. I think Reed's a walk-in, no-brainer, upper room Hall of Famer. Carroll gets in, or at least should. Peyton should get in. Peyton may have another Super Bowl win in him, and he'd be the first coach to win a Super Bowl with two different teams. That would make him a no-brainer. And Jim Harbaugh, hey, he needs more time in the NFL, but if he goes like he's done during his years with the 49ers and now with the Chargers, he'll end up having the resume to get into. Speaking of AFC West coaches, former coaches who have won a Super Bowl, John Gruden. Here's a question. How can John Gruden even potentially be subject to the NFL kangaroo court as it relates to his lawsuit? He wasn't even in the league when he sent those email messages. Is it just because he was in the league at the time the emails were leaked? Let me try to keep this as simple as I can. What the NFL did, they fashioned an argument for arbitration based on the NFL's constitution and bylaws. And in the NFL's constitution and bylaws, the commissioner has the power to arbitrate, to be the final word via arbitration on anything that involves conduct detrimental to the game. So the argument is the Gruden emails are conduct detrimental to the game. So anything related to the Gruden emails, the disputes would be resolved by the commissioner. The problem is the lawsuit isn't about the emails. It's about the process for leaking the emails. It's because the commissioner or someone else deliberately weaponized the emails against John Gruden by leaking them first to the Wall Street Journal, then to the New York Times. That's the thing the case is about. So, okay, well, that's conduct detrimental too. So the commissioner has the full power. Anytime it's anything that is conduct detrimental to the league, I've got the full power by virtue of the bylaws and constitution of the NFL to resolve the dispute. That's the argument they've made. The problem is it failed before the lower court. It succeeded before a 3-judge panel of the Nevada Supreme Court, and now it's pending before the full 7-judge panel as to whether or not that's going to be enough. And the ace in the hole, stick to sports. Stick to sports. The ace in the hole is the U.S. Supreme Court, where I believe the NFL is confident that any issue that it takes based on arbitration and its clauses that force coaches and others out of the court system, I think the NFL is confident it's going to win 6-3. So the NFL came up with an argument that I personally reject, but I don't have a vote. But I think it's a bullcrap argument, but it's one so far, and it may save the day, and it may keep us from ever finding out who ordered the code red and who compromised the integrity of a season by forcing John Gruden out 5 games in. Could have happened before, could have happened after. He was forced out during the season, and that undermined, we got to protect the integrity of the game, the integrity of the season. We don't change rules during a season because we have to protect the integrity of each season. You forced out a coach. Somebody forced out a coach during a season. And we're not going to find out who it was and what happened if it goes to arbitration. We only have a chance of finding out if it doesn't. And here we are, nearly 4 years from the filing of the lawsuit, and we still don't know. Is it going to open court? Is it going to arbitration? And here's hoping if it does go to open court, John Gruden just doesn't take whatever settlement the NFL offers and ends it. A couple of years ago, one of the biggest stories we had of the month, I think it was July, was Gruden reportedly intent on burning it down, pushing this thing to the limit. If he's still willing to do it and he's able to go in open court, there can be a lot of burning down that John Gruden does. All right, next question. What are some of the most notable cases of corruption you've observed in the NFL? That one comes from BIJ703. The thing that I remember, and this came during the Saints Bountygate scandal, this was the first moment that it dawned on me that you have to be very careful about taking anything the NFL says, being the league office, at face value. And it was during the Bountygate scandal, and they had Mary Jo White, who has become one of the de facto people they send to investigate when issues come up with the various teams. They hired her to basically sell to the media why the bounty scandal was a big deal and why the players needed to be suspended and why yada, yada, yada. And I remember when they took sideline audio from the NFC Championship, and she characterized it in a way where it was one player that supposedly was saying, "Give me my money," and they painted it as being crystal clear and a smoking gun for this plan to take out Brett Favre in the 2009 NFC Championship. And I remember having an epiphany when I was watching it very carefully, frame by frame, and listening to it very carefully. It wasn't nearly as clear as she was saying. And that was the moment where I first decided I'm not going to believe anything they say. I'm not going to be smitten by Big Shield. I'm not going to just accept it as true. I'm going to question, and I'm going to suspect that there may be some BS going on behind it that they're trying to get us to buy. And I carried that attitude into Deflategate. I know if Chris was on right now, we'd argue about it some more, but I'm very skeptical of how they handled it. I think they had an end in mind, and they worked backward to justify the end result. And it was very shoddy, and it was very substandard. And I think the conclusion should have been there may have been a scheme in place in past games to deflate footballs, but the evidence that it happened in this specific game, the 2014 AFC Championship, is inconclusive. That was another one. The whole thing with, and, look, the concussion stuff, I mean, how many years did they downplay? Did they deny? Did they hide with the mild traumatic brain injury committee? which was run by Elliot Pellman, Paul Tagliabue's rheumatologist, just delaying the reckoning as long as possible. Now, the reckoning ended up being not very bad. Yeah, they had to pay a shitload of money to former players as part of the class action settlement. But once everybody knew that, it's not good for your brain to play football, it's not like they had a land rush out the door. Chris Borland was the only guy that made that conscientious decision to retire early in his career. All these other players keep playing. Guys keep playing. There may be a reduction in youth football, but there's no reduction in college or pro football because of it. But the way that was handled, as evidenced by League of Denial and the concussion film, it was shameful. And one of the things that never really got pointed out the way it should, the NFLPA was right there. The Players Association was right there, seat at the table. And it was an existential threat to the National Football League, although once it all came to light, it really didn't have the same impact that people thought it would have. Another thing that came to light a couple of weeks ago and hasn't had the impact people thought it would have, the collusion case. And I'm only talking about it because I got a question that I think is important because it goes to the legal nuances as to why the arbitrator got the collusion case wrong. Because remember, he found, Christopher Droney was the arbitrator, he found that the league office and the management council wanted teams to collude, encouraged them to collude when it comes to fully guaranteed contracts in the wake of the Deshaun Watson 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed deal. They wanted them to do it, but the teams didn't do it. Wanted it, but they didn't do it, right? My position has been there's plenty of circumstantial evidence to show that it happened. The question today with where's the collusion? There's a screenshot of some testimony from John Mara, longtime chair of the Management Council Executive Committee. And the quote from, the quote from the arbitrator, several owners also stated they make their own independent decisions given the competitiveness of the league. Mr. Mara, for example, asserted, I am not going to be told what to do in terms of an individual player contract by anybody from Management Council or by anybody from another club. He further explained, and this is the quote, just the thought of me calling Jerry Jones or somebody and asking him not to guarantee Dak Prescott's contract or somebody else's contract, he would laugh at me, among other choice words, I'm sure. Just the whole notion is ridiculous. We're out there to win games, and we're going to do whatever we can to improve our own teams. And if that means give more guarantees, we're going to give more guarantees. Okay, fine. That ignores the fact that the league office and the management council told the teams to watch the guarantees they were giving. And why even have the management council? Why even try to herd the cats if at the end of the day, we ignore all of that because we're in competition. There's no reason to try to get anyone on the same page about anything because all the team should be doing is operating as secretly as they do with their other competitors. It's the Coke and Pepsi example. It's the Walmart and Target example that I gave in relation to the Broncos and former Walmart CEO Greg Penner, who now owns that team. The attitude expressed by John Mara should result in no management council and no coordination and no effort to compare notes. But what do we have? We have the Dean Spanos, Michael Bidwell text messages celebrating the Kyler Murray contract and pointing out that it's going to help the Chargers avoid giving Justin Herbert a fully guaranteed deal. We've got the internal emails from Greg Penner to his business partners telling them that the other owners will be happy with the fact that they avoided doing a fully guaranteed deal with Russell Wilson. That's the issue. That's the reality. That's the circumstantial evidence. And that's why jury trials are so damn important, because the collective wisdom of a jury would pierce right through the bullshit. The self-serving, no, we didn't do that. I dealt with that for years. I got to wrap this up, but let me just make this point, because when I was practicing law and defending employees who had been fired from their jobs, no one ever got on the witness stand and admitted it. They all said what they had to say. Oh, what about perjury? Who cares? The lie gets baked in the moment they sign the termination slip. Everything that's said after that is just consistent with the initial lie that was told not under oath. Getting to the truth is difficult. You need circumstantial evidence to get to the truth. You need to be able to show actions that defy the words. In this case, the actions, the text messages sent between Bidwell and Spanos defy the words of John Mara. The communications within the Broncos defy the words of John Mara. You need to have a jury to sort that out. At the end of the day, the system arbitrator was not comfortable saying all of these multi-billionaires are full of crap. I reject their explanation. I'm going to focus on what they did and what they said when they weren't on the witness stand. All right, on that note, I need to wrap it up. Thanks again for some of your time. We'll be back Thursday for another all-new edition of PFT PM. Until then, check us out around the clock at ProFootballTalk.com. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.